All right, there is some fundamental objection handling theory that I don't see sales teams leveraging enough. So to begin with, there are two dynamics at play when it comes to objection handling. The first is the objection itself. This is what they explicitly say, but it's not actually what you want to try to solve for. An example might be, we don't have budget or time for this initiative. Now, what's behind that is called an interest. The interest is what they're really aiming to preserve or pursue. And so with the objection of we don't have budget or time for this, the interest might be, well, what we have feels like it's working well enough, or we don't want to take on the risk and the effort of change. The interest is actually what we want to work with when we're coming to objection handling. This comes from negotiation theory. Objections, they're stated demands, and they usually only have one answer. I have no budget. The answer is, I want you to go away. Interests are the underlying concerns and needs, and they might have multiple solutions outside what the demand is. Now, in psychology, there's this concept of name it and tame it, that if there's an unspoken dynamic that's full of the potential to derail a conversation or a situation, if you explicitly talk about that unspoken dynamic and put it on the table, then it loses all of its power to derail things. That's what we're doing here. The interest is actually what has all the power to keep progress locked and loses most of its power when it's explicitly explored. So then your job as a salesperson is to identify and then validate the interest before you craft a response, because you could be addressing the wrong problem. Like this, let's go back to, we don't have time or budget for this, right? And you go right into, well, I have an ROI calculator and it can show you that you'll get far more return than what you're using today. And maybe we can sharpen the pencil and have some flexibility in pricing, that sort of thing. Now, this response is trying to solve for a pricing issue, which is wrong because the interest often isn't the pricing. A better response might be something along the lines of, listen, I've heard this many times before. It comes from a place that you already feel like what you have is working and the risk and effort to change is just not worth it. Is that the case here? Now, this sidesteps the objection and it validates whether you're on the right track with something else. It addresses the interest behind the objection. And if it's not the interest, then often the interest gets surfaced, or you can ask some questions to bring it to the table. Now, once you have the interest identified, there are two more steps. Step one is to validate the interest. You need to authentically empathize with them. If you move right to the next step, you're going to come across as if you're not really listening and you're just giving them lip service. So you really want to truly let them know that you understand what they're dealing with. And then, and only then, do you pivot to addressing the interest. So it might look something like this. I've heard this many times before, you don't have budget and you don't have time. And it often comes from the place that it's not so much that you don't have more budget, but that you just have to shift the existing budget. And I get, though, that that requires more effort and more risk. It's not that you don't have time or budget. It just feels like it's not worth it. Is that the case? And then they might say, yes, I mean, I don't know. Why change what's not broken? Got it. You validated it. And then you can say, I fully understand. I get it. If I was in your shoes, I would feel the same way. But what if I showed you that what you're using just isn't working as well as you think? And that changing to something that works even better is less effort than you might expect. And we can minimize the risk of a change. Is that interesting to you? Can we talk about that for 5 or 10 minutes? Now, what you're doing is you're addressing the underlying interest on your terms. You're not even talking about budget and time. This is important. The objection, whether it's no budget, no time, whatever it is, it's well rehearsed and they know it works well. That's why they use it. You don't want to fight that battle, but pivoting the conversation, in this case, to the potential ineffectiveness of the current solution, which has its own risks, by the way, and minimizing the switching effort and risk. Those are not well-rehearsed topics. They're unlikely to be expected, and they're perhaps intriguing. Have the conversation about this unfamiliar yet important territory on your terms. And now, when you've done that, you've effectively handled the objection. But then you ask, Zito, how did you know that behind the budget and time objection is the sentiment of don't try to fix what's not broken? I made a good guess because I did the work in advance. If you've been selling anything for any period of time, you'll see a pattern of objections and hesitations. Great. So here's the exercise. You can do this as a sales rep or a sales manager or a product marketing leader, or ideally, you all get together and work through this exercise as a team. First, you pick the top 5 objections. Then take some time and put yourself in the buyer's shoes and list out what you think are likely the top 3 interests behind those objections. If you don't know, then explain it to ChatGPT, what you sell, who you sell to, along with the objections, and then ask it to think like those buyer personas and tell you the top 3 likely interests. Great. Now you have the interests. Next, write out 1 to 2 solid, tactful but finessed phrases that validate the interest and tee up your pivot statement. Lastly, write out a pivot statement. Perfect. Now you've prepared to handle objections in the most effective way possible. You have the objection and the interest, then you validate and pivot. This is objection handling. It's a fundamental skill, and this preparation exercise is also fundamental for any sales rep.